We are in Exodus on Sunday nights, aren't we? And at last, we have reached the juicy bits. If you like dramatic, exciting Bible stories, then you're going to love the next few weeks of our studies in Exodus. Because in Exodus chapter 7, it is payback time. After 3 centuries of Egyptian oppression, Yahweh's finally going to start delivering his people. This fight, this battle that it seems for months we've been looking forward to, is finally going to begin. In Exodus 7, we see the Lord's opening shots. He sends his first couple of missiles into Egypt as the fight begins, and it's going to get exciting. Before we get going, though, let's start with a question. I want to ask you, how do you view our current leaders? This is rhetorical. Don't shout out, all right? We're told throughout the New Testament, aren't we, that we as Christians are to respect, obey, and pray for those in authority over us. And hopefully we do that. However, we can do all of that and still deeply dislike our leaders, can't we? We can dislike their policies, we can dislike their hypocrisy, and we are free in this country to criticise their decisions. In fact, we're pretty unique in history when it comes to that. We get to criticise, mock, and then remove our leaders when they let us down. We get to do that every 4 to 5 years. And as a result, a lot of leaders, particularly in the West, are derided by their own people. Openly made fun of, mocked. They're made the butt of the joke, aren't they? So be it on the right with characters like Trump, or on the left with our own current Prime Minister. These men are criticised, they're ridiculed, and they evoke strong emotions, don't they? Usually negative. We always complain about our leaders, don't we? We're always complaining about the people who run the country. What do you hear a lot of the time? Well, they don't know what they're doing. They haven't got a clue. And the country's falling apart. Britain is broken. You hear that a lot. So the respect and reverence that the public has for our overseers is at an all-time low. But as we come to this section in Exodus, we've got to get our heads around the fact that that is the complete opposite way the ancients viewed their leaders. If we're going to understand what Yahweh is doing as he begins his fight with Pharaoh, we have to understand how the Egyptians saw their king. How was he understood by the people? Because there's a reason that God attacks Egypt in the way he does. So 2 things to understand as we try and get our head around these plagues then. What do we learn about Pharaoh? Well, number 1, Pharaoh was seen as divine. The Egyptians had a particular god called Horus, or Horus. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce any of these right. I'm not an Egyptian scholar, right? Horus, we'll call him Horus. He was the god of the sky, hence the eagle's head. Horus had the sun as his right eye and the moon as his left eye. Those are the bodies in the sky, right? He was the high god, the one over all of the heavens. And Pharaoh, the man, was seen as the earthly embodiment of Horus. He was seen as the son of the god. In the public's mind, he was a living god. Now, upon death, Pharaoh would merge, he would become part of the being. This guy looks a bit froggy. This guy's name is Osiris. He is the lord of the underworld. So Pharaoh the man, his spirit would merge with Osiris, and Osiris would judge the dead. So the people saw Pharaoh the same way communist leaders insist on being viewed today. You go to communist countries and there's a big picture of a leader. They almost see them as a god. That's how Pharaoh was seen. They commanded respect. The slightest hint of dissent, and it wasn't a man that you were disagreeing with. No, it was a supernatural being. So Pharaoh was revered and feared. Secondly, Pharaoh had a job to do as a living god. And that job was to maintain something called ma'at. That's how you spell it. Again, I don't know if I'm saying it right. Ma'at. Now, what's ma'at? Ma'at in Egyptology is the idea of cosmic order. As the embodiment of this supernatural being, the people believed that it was Pharaoh who kept different aspects of nature going. Pharaoh was the one responsible for keeping the Nile, in particular, healthy. He was supposed to ensure that it flooded at the right time and at the right height every year, so that the Nile would water the Nile Delta. If Pharaoh was doing a good job, if he found favour in the eyes of the various Egyptian gods, well, the cogs of nature would turn effectively. Nature would play ball with him. Ma'at, order, would be maintained. To be considered a good king, to please the gods, Pharaoh had to maintain justice. He had a responsibility for social stability. Pharaoh, in the people's minds, was the one who held back the chaos. In short, in his mind and in the mind of the nation, he was the beating heart of the nation, the soul of the nation, Egypt in one man. And what about Egypt? Well, just like the Roman Empire, the Egyptians considered themselves the pinnacle of humanity. They were human beings' finest achievement. I mean, they had the pyramids, they had great temples. Theirs was the civilization that exceeded all the others. Now, what symbol captured all these aspects of Pharaoh's power and character? Well, you won't be surprised to hear that the symbol was that of a cobra, a serpent. On their headdresses, the Pharaoh would have this cobra, this symbol. This one's on Tutankhamun. This cobra is representing the Pharaoh's divine authority. And it's given him protection, the protection of the gods. The cobra was an emblem of power and kingship. Serpents were symbols of royal sovereignty. They demonstrated Pharaoh's ability to subdue the chaos, to keep the darkness at bay. So think about the way a snake eats its prey. It swallows its prey whole, doesn't it? And then it kind of absorbs the animal into itself. Whatever it's eaten just kind of gets absorbed. A snake is able to kill much bigger animals than itself. It can bite the ankle of an ox. It can bring down cattle. And so for the ancients, this would have seemed like some magical, powerful beast. In their minds, a lot of people hate snakes, right? People deride snakes these days. But in their minds, snakes were seen as magical. They were seen as demonstrating kingship. They showed Pharaoh's dominance over the whole world. What then is God going to do? Well, he's going to show his dominance over Pharaoh's kingship. So we've got 2 points tonight, and we'll end with a question as we consider the first 2 signs that God gives Pharaoh. So, point number 1. Pharaoh loses control of his crown. Verse 8 to 14. Look at verse 8. Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Prove yourselves by working a miracle,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent.'" Last few weeks we've been looking at Moses, and he was reluctant, wasn't he, to go and do what God said. Well, finally, he's going to play ball. He's going to carry out God's will. And remember, he's taking Aaron with him to be a spokesman. And in Aaron's hand, he's got this rod. This rod is a physical representation of the finger of Yahweh. Verse 10. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servants, and it became a what? Well, a serpent, probably a cobra, I think. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers And they, the magicians of Egypt, also did the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. Now, did Pharaoh's magicians have supernatural power? Maybe you might think they had demonic power that could turn sticks into snakes. Well, possibly, but I personally doubt it. The narrator calls them magicians who use secret arts. These men, I suspect, were ancient illusionists. You'll see YouTube videos, won't you? And there'll be magicians and they'll just do mad stuff. They'll make like a card appear in a bottle. They'll know your telephone number before having never met you. They'll appear even to see a guy cut his finger off and then stick it back on. Mad. But it's all a trick, isn't it? It's all smoke and mirrors. It's an illusion. And that's crucial because Pharaoh's power is all an illusion. It's all a trick. He doesn't really have supernatural power, does he? He's not controlling the sun or the moon or the flooding of the Nile. It's Yahweh who is sovereign. And so look what happens. Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. The magician's snakes are just a couple of run-of-the-mill grass snakes that have been wrangled earlier on. But Aaron's cobra is a supernatural beast, powered and created by God. And so it just swallows these two little snakes with ease. And then, as we find out in the following verses, the serpent turns back into a staff. Verse 13, still Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them as the Lord had said. Pharaoh's like, well, big deal. I mean, your trick is slightly more complex than my trick. But it's all just still a trick, isn't it? And I'm the one who holds all the real power. These silly games don't prove anything to me. So what's your next move? I'm not going to let these people go. Well, second point, Pharaoh loses control of his divine authority. Strike one, Yahweh's given Pharaoh like a sample pot of what he can do. Symbolically, Pharaoh has been warned. My snake can eat your snake. But Pharaoh's ignored the warning, so now God is going to strike him practically. And notice where God tells Moses to meet Pharaoh. Verse 15, go to Pharaoh in the morning as he's going out to the water. Stand on the bank of the Nile to meet him. I wonder what object, what geographical feature sums up your nation. For England, it's probably the White Cliffs of Dover, isn't it? Wales, maybe it's Mount Snowdon or the beautiful beaches of Pembrokeshire. Northern Ireland has the Giant's Causeway. And Scotland has got Loch Ness or maybe the Highlands. Well, ancient Egypt, it was the Nile. And where might we see, we might see our famous scenery on a calendar? Well, the Egyptians would worship their scenery. In the same way Hindus deify the Ganges, the Egyptians considered the Nile itself a god. They would call this Nile, again, not sure if I'm saying it right, Happy, all right? Happy would fit in well these days because it was a non-binary god. It was both male and female. Its pronouns were they, them. It was considered male because the Nile impregnated the land with life and vitality. And she was considered female because she was seen as milking the land. She would nurture it. The whole of Egyptian life and culture centered around this great river. It watered the crops. It fed the animals. It was a highway for trade and commerce. The Nile was the main artery of the kingdom. Its physical, its spiritual engine. So what's Pharaoh doing there early in the morning? Well, probably a mixture of two things, right? Number one, he's bathing. Royals like to take a lot of baths. They are a cut above the populace, aren't they? They're pure. They're special. So Pharaoh takes a bath every day. But in that washing, there's also an element of ritual cleansing and preparation. Pharaoh is the king, the priest, the representative of God on earth. So he's going down to be one with the Nile, one with the gods. For him, this is like holy water, and he's being anointed. So let's set the scene then. The cool morning sun is just rising over the pyramids, and Pharaoh alights from his chariot. He takes off his headpiece, gives it to his servants, takes off his outer garments. I ain't going to take it all off. His servants help him into the water. But suddenly, from just a little further up the bank, he hears a voice. And he sees two little old men. Oh no, he thinks, it's those two Hebrew magicians again. And he's about to shout to his guards to have them removed, but suddenly, the older one makes an announcement, verse 17. By this you shall know that I am Yahweh. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and I shall turn it into blood. The fish in the Nile shall die, and the Nile will stink. And the Egyptians will grow weary of drinking water from the Nile. Now, Pharaoh's in there, waist high, and he finds this hilarious. He looks up at his servants, are you hearing this? And they all begin laughing. These two silly old men. But the old man's not laughing. And Aaron lifts up the rods from the bank and he smacks the surface of the water. And as soon as the wood hits the water, a cloud of red ink begins to permeate in the river. And the water itself seems to darken. Now, it's important to say, when the narrator tells us that the Nile turned to blood, blood in Hebrew is an adjective, not a noun. So he's telling us first and foremost that it's changing colour. I don't think we're to take this as literal blood. But nevertheless, the results are horrifying. Something supernatural is occurring. You can imagine this tide of red oozing, seeping towards Pharaoh. He can see it getting closer and closer. And he's disgusted. And he starts in a very undignified, unkingly way. He starts scrabbling out of the water. It's chasing him down like a shark. And his servants have to drag him out by his arms. And I like to think he just about escapes this polluted water touching him. By the time he looks back to where Moses and Aaron were, they've gone. But they haven't stopped working, because that day they visit every pond, every canal, every reservoir, every pool, every water fountain, and Aaron touches the water with his staff. And before long, verse 21, there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. Every water source is contaminated. It's undrinkable. Verse 21, and the fish in the Nile died. Think of all the animals that a river is home to. Think about how many fish there are in the average river. Well, after an hour or so, little silver bodies start to appear on the surface. They start to bob. And the corpses of these fish get washed up on the shore, and they get caught up in the reeds and the branches at the water's edge. Eels, huge catfish, are floating around. Tigerfish, thousands, if not millions, of these little fish called tilapia. They're about the size of your hand. And they're bobbing up and down on the water. And there's so many that the land animals, they can't eat them all. So they're feasting on them at the sides. But eventually, they can't eat enough of them. And so after an hour in the hot Egyptian sun, these fish start to stink. And the people in Egypt, they're mortified. Remember, this river is their god. And so what are they observing? Well, their god is sick. They, them is ill. It's died. It's literally coughing up blood. The Nile can no longer sustain life. Notice how many times the Nile is mentioned in this chapter. 13 times the narrator makes a note of it. Yahweh is showing the Egyptians and the watching world who's really in charge. The Nile, it's his. All the fish in it are his. All the benefits and wealth that this river brings to the nation is his. Yahweh is in control. If the first plague exposed the weakness of Happy, then what does it tell the Egyptians about Pharaoh? Well, Pharaoh's lost control, hasn't he? His claim to divine authority is an illusion. Ma'at has broken down. So the people are thinking, well, maybe Pharaoh's sinned. Perhaps he's weak. Maybe he's lost the divine support of the gods. And maybe this Hebrew king, this guy Moses, maybe he's brought a more powerful deity with him. This Yahweh, this God of the Hebrews, he seems to outrank Horus and Happy. He can undo Egypt at will. If Pharaoh's not on the ball, then Egypt is going to suffer cosmic disintegration. And maybe the people are thinking, well, if Egypt dies, then other nations are going to come in and attack us. Pharaoh is losing control. So what does he do? Well, he questions himself, doesn't he? Does this Hebrew God, does his ability to pollute the Nile really show that he's superior? And he calls in his magicians, his advisors. And he says, what should I do? This new God, should he be feared? Is this as serious as everyone thinks? And they say, Your Majesty, live forever. We, as agents of Happy, we also have this power. And they bring out a bucket of water. And they wave their hands over it. Maybe they put a cloth over it and then do some sort of illusion. Say some words. And in an instant, oh, look, Your Majesty. It's blood. You see, O great one, this Moses is nothing special. We have this power over the water too. So there's no need to yield. Verse 22, the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. Pharaoh turned and went into his house, and he did not take even this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink, and they could not drink the water of the Nile. 7 full days passed after the Lord had struck the Nile. Okay, 2 signs, 2 miracles. Pharaoh's losing control. So let's end with one important question. Here's the question. Who's really in control? I said at the start of the sermon that the reverence and respect we have for modern leaders is a world away from how the ancients experienced things. But mankind's arrogance when it comes to order and control has not changed one bit, has it? In Pharaoh, we meet a man who mistakenly believed that he was in control of every aspect of his environment. Be it the crops, be it the livestock, be it the height of the river in floods. Ancient Egyptians looked at their leader and they said, bring order, bring stability, bring us control. And what did Pharaoh say? He said, yeah, we can do it. And it's still the same 4,000 years later, isn't it? What does mankind say? Well, he says, we can do it. We can do anything. We can bring order and stability. We can maintain ma'at. This is why successive governments, they just bring in law after law after law. Because they think they can fix every problem, every societal ill with just more legislation. We can bring control. That's what they think. If we plan enough, if we spend enough, if we regulate enough, we can keep the chaos at bay. We can engineer a society of fairness, prosperity, safety, and unity. Our leaders honestly think that they can create a utopia. That's why in the UK we experience ridiculous episodes where people are arrested for things they've written on social media. Because the government wrongly believe they should be the ones to control the very thoughts that go on in your head and the words that come out of your mouth. Human beings think we're in control of our own health, don't we? The NHS was once seen as the jewel in the crown of the nation. We can control illness. We can extend everyone's life. We can force you to be healthy. With enough investment, enough innovation, we can fix every medical problem. We're so arrogant, we now think we can control the weather. We can engineer the planet for our own benefit. With enough willpower, we can regulate the climate. We can solve global warming through human cooperation. So we still see governments and institutions trying to maintain ma'at. But of course, individuals do it too, don't we? We think we're in control. We can plan out our careers. We'll set ourselves targets. If I plan well enough, well, then I'll succeed. The only way's up. We seek financial stability and order. Savings give us security. Investments give us a future. Insurance give us protection against the chaos. Modern man thinks he can control his feelings with self-help books, special apps. I can medicate myself into mental utopia. We want to control the size of our families, don't we? Can engineer the perfect number of children at the perfect time. Do you see, the spirit of Pharaoh is still very much alive. We've got to ask ourselves, who is really in control? Well, God reminds us tonight in Exodus 7 that he is sovereign. If your faith and your confidence is in your Pharaoh and in your Nile, then it's misplaced faith, isn't it? Because God can strip Pharaoh of his crown and he can bring the Nile to its knees. Our control is an illusion. Government control is an illusion, isn't it? For all of their planning, all of their regulations, what happens? Well, pandemics erupt, economies wobble, sudden crises shatter human planning. The best laid plans of mice and men, the old saying, isn't it? We can try and stay healthy, we can eat the right foods, we can take the right vitamins, we can have the right health plan, but we simply cannot stop the inevitable. We inhabit weak, feeble, fragile bodies that must die. We are not in control. I hope this doesn't come as a shock to you, but we cannot control the weather. Mankind will never be able to control the weather. It's a pipe dream to believe that we can. With big nations like China and India, they're not going to stop burning oil because someone with blue hair has cemented themselves to the floor, right? It's not going to happen. Weather systems are complex. Nature doesn't behave as predicted. And yet humanity thinks, we can control this. We can't. Control is an illusion. We plan, we save, we medicate. But in an instant, God shows us who's really in control, who's really in charge. Our snake is devoured. Our Nile turns to blood and dies. Everything we trust in, whether it's a king, a system, or ourselves, eventually collapses under the weight of reality, doesn't it? So I'll ask you again, who do you think is in control of your life? If your faith is in Pharaoh, if your faith is in your Nile, then it's misplaced. If you're still trusting in those things, well, it's time to understand that you're in desperate need of a new king. We need a king who will actually follow through on his promises, don't we? A king who can keep his manifesto promises. Whether red or blue, we've learned that leaders quickly realize the limits of their control. So they make big promises, but then reality hits. So they might have to raise taxes. They may not be able to smash the gangs or get the economy back where it should be. Human kings break their promises and let us down. They're all just pharaohs. That's why tonight we can rejoice in a truly divine king, a unique king, The king who is Jesus, the real son of the Most High gods. Jesus, who is Yahweh in the flesh. And he says, look, put your faith, put your trust in him. And he will follow through on his promises. He will save you from your sin. And he'll transform you by his Spirit. And he'll resurrect you one day into a new heaven and a new earth. See, Jesus is the only king who can offer true stability. He's the one who brings true order into a chaotic world. Pharaoh's power was illusionary, but Christ's is absolute. Remember what it says in Colossians 1:15. Jesus is the image of the invisible gods, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible. Whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is a king who's really in charge. A king who not even death can defeat. A king who sends the serpent packing. Jesus is the king who brings order. Order that Pharaoh could only imagine. And of course, look at the difference between Pharaoh and Christ. Pharaoh ruled with fear, but King Jesus rules in peace. Pharaoh used slave labor, but Jesus offers you rest. He says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Pharaoh demanded a quota, do you remember? Give me this amount of bricks. But Jesus is full of grace. He says, come as you are, and I'll accept you. Pharaoh brought death and destruction, but Jesus brings life and joy. Well, look, who's in control of your life this evening? If it's your River Nile, if it's your Pharaoh, then eventually all of your plans are going to end up swollen and bloated and stinking like the fish in this story. Your river will die, your king will be humiliated. But if your faith is in Jesus, then he offers you streams of living water. He offers you eternal water. Revelation 22. In the new heaven, the new earth, the new Jerusalem, what do we read? Well, I'll close with these verses. Revelation 22:1. The angel showed me, John, the river of the water of life, bright as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Through the middle of the street of the city, also on either side of the river, the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and his servants will worship him. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. And night will be no more. They will need no light or lamp or sun, for the Lord God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. Drop your Nile and come to Jesus, the living water.